pool, but that doesn't always translate into many volunteers, right? So one way that we try and get people involved is to divvy up what the roles may be so that there's small. We have the travel logistics. That's what I am. We have a parent who handles just our meals because we provide meals during the off season when we have special workshops and so forth. And then also during our build season, which is the most important, right? Because during competition season, I think your team probably, along with our team, we meet quite long hours on the weekends. I have another parent that helps to manage all the carpools for us because we don't hire buses as little as, well, we hire buses as little as possible just to save money for the team. So we rely on parent transportation often. I have another parent that handles all the forms. So I think anyone who is a team associated with the school has to go through the school district for many forms, which can get to be quite cumbersome at times. And so I have a parent who's just specialized in taking care of everything that needs to be turned into the district. We have special social events on our team. We have like a opening year barbecue, like information night. We have alumni dinners, and we have an end of year celebration for our team. So I have another parent that just takes care of our social events. We have something called DYR, which is our Davis Youth Robotics. It's one of our outreach programs that we have mentors on our team, our students from our team mentor our youth robotics. And so one of the things we do when we host tournaments, which we host one in October, November, and December, is that we have a snack shack that helps raise money and that goes right back into the Davis Youth Robotics program. And then for kickoff, I have another parent who helps to coordinate a set of parents who will build those practice field elements. And so it's really nice to have these committee leads so that they can then take care of organizing the parents that will volunteer for each of these smaller portions. And it makes it easier so that I'm not one person doing all of that. So as the parent committee's logistics lead, what I do is we have meetings twice a month. And for us, that works because there's just enough going on in our team where meeting the first and third Wednesday of every month keeps everyone in the loop. And then obviously delegating tasks is the great way to involve more parents. You have your committee leads, but then in addition to committee leads, we're always going to need the grassroots that to come in to help be the volunteer drivers or providing meals or for whatever it is that we have that we need parent support for. I created a volunteer interest form last year it was, or maybe 2 years ago. And that has really helped. Because sometimes, when you just say, hey, parents, be on the lookout for when we need your assistance. And it's like this blanket volunteer statement. And then it's like crickets sometimes, right? So when you have a volunteer interest form and then you have specific needs that you want filled, that way parents can say, oh, well, I don't mind helping with driving. I just don't have time to do mentoring, for example, or I can help with the DYR Snack Shack, but I don't want to drive to away events. And so it makes the list much more manageable so that if I'm just looking for parents for a specific role, I can just look to email that specific group of parents instead of having a blanket email go out every time I need help. And then the last thing is that I act as the liaison between the parents, the students, and the mentors. And it's kind of it's been an interesting evolution of this position to be this conduit of information between the different groups. And it's worked out for our team to have that so that there's like one kind of constant that the information flows through. This is kind of hard to see, I know, but this is one of those sample parent interest forms. Initially, I handed this out as a hard copy document at our information night barbecue, thinking that I would capture more responses that way. But I've actually found that it's easier. We migrated it over to a Google Doc. And then that way, or a Google form. And then once we have the Google form, when they respond, it's captured, creates the automatic spreadsheet. And then from the spreadsheet, we can then write formulas to parse out all the different volunteer needs that we have. And then I have like these subsets of parent names. So anyone who's interested in that, I can certainly send them a copy. Send you guys a copy. And so you can get an idea of what we request help for. When I'm guessing it's very similar to what your needs may be on your team as well. The other thing we do is on our website, we have a tab so that it makes it easy for the parents to get to. If you have a team website, this is really helpful. So we have something that's called Support Us, and then a drop down that says Parent Committee. And on that page that's just for the parents, we have links to our Sign Up Genius for our meals. We have links to the volunteer interest form, and we have an email address for them to contact us, so that hopefully we've centralized the information that makes it easy for the parents to express interest in volunteering and contacting us when they need information. As the travel logistics coordinator, I handle all the accommodations, transportation, and meals for our team as the overall umbrella, which I know can be a daunting task. And that certainly could be separated on some teams if you want someone to handle just the accommodations and someone to research your modes of transportation and someone to handle your build season meals, or the not build, this is for when we travel away. So like someone could research all the restaurants. For me, I find that although it's a lot of work, it is easier for me to just do all of that because then I'm not having to check in with too many people on this part for our team. For all the arrangements, one of the biggest things I learned through this process is you need to determine who in your district allows you to sign contracts. So initially, I was able to sign contracts when I was making arrangements with hotels or restaurants, and then it has evolved where in our school district, our chief business officer has to be the one to sign the contracts. So knowing that, I have to leave myself a little bit more lead time, because it's not as if I say, I need to have this contract signed and they're going to get it back to me in a day. And so if the restaurant or the hotel wants the contracts returned within a week, I just have to keep that in the back of my mind so that I know to give myself more lead time to get that information back from the CBO, or I just have to tell the hotels and restaurants, hey, the district has to sign this, I can't sign this. Just take that into consideration for your response time back to the venues. I found that it's much easier if I collect all the information from our membership at the very beginning of the school year. So whatever information I may need from the student population, and that means if we have to fly anywhere, I find it easier to have their full name, and you may not always get that right, but whatever you need for that airplane ticket, the first name, last name, birth date, and making sure that all that information is spot on correct. That way, when you get confirmed for a competition, for example, you're not waiting to collect that information. You have it already, and you could just go ahead and make the arrangements that you need, and then you're not held up. Okay. And the last thing is, one thing I migrated to is having a master list, which that's what I call it, but it's a spreadsheet that includes all the information that our travel team would need whenever we go anywhere. And even to something like this where it's local. And on that master list, it's basically a Google Sheet document. And within that Google Sheet, I have separate tabs, or additional multiple spreadsheets within that one workbook. Does that make sense? So like I'll have the itinerary, our carpools, our rooming arrangements. That way it's like a one-stop shopping for the parents who get the information and for the students who get that information. And it's not like multiple documents that are being sent, because before I came up with that process, it was, a PDF here and a PDF there, and it was just getting a little bit too confusing. So I thought centralizing it all in one area has been received with great positive response. So I think we're going to keep going with that method in the future. When we make arrangements for accommodations for hotels, I know First has that First Event housing, and that is helpful. Sometimes it depends if they've made arrangements with hotels near the competition venue, and that's not always the case. The pricing is also not always the cheapest, but it's certainly a resource that you can go to and find out what hotels have been reserved for the venue, and try there first and see what their pricing is like. But I always like to still price out hotels in the nearby vicinity, just because obviously none of us are overflowing with money, and I don't think. And we need to be very cost conscious when we are making these arrangements. In the off season, I reserve the hotels as soon as I know the dates for our events are published. And that's because for our team, we tend to go to the same events. We go to Chesney Champs every September. We host CCC, but we don't need accommodations for here. And we usually do Madtown, at least for the 4 years I've been on the team, we do Madtown Throwdown, every year. So those are events where Madtown Throwdown is always Veterans Day weekend, and Chessie Champs is typically the last weekend of September. So in the summertime, I can start planning for that because I've actually found if I wait till a month before the event, sometimes the hotels in the area are booked out, especially like in Chessie Champs when you have something happening at the San Jose Convention Center. I think one year there was a concert by Beyonce, and then there was also some other event going on. There were two really large events, and all the hotels in that nearby vicinity were booked out really early. So you just kind of want to take that into account depending on where you go for your off-season events to plan ahead if you can in the summertime for the off-season. For competition season, as soon as your team is confirmed for an event, right now we have this lottery system where you place, your first choice, second choice, third choice. So I think as soon as you're confirmed for your events, I would start looking for the hotels. If you think it's something that it's a venue that you will attend year after year, I create a spreadsheet and I basically make a list of all the hotels that I've contacted, and I include information on how far the venue is from where we're staying so that hopefully we get to be as close as possible. And that lines up with the fact that it's also the least expensive option. Not always the case, but that's what I try to do. So some tips that I've learned along the way is that 4 weeks before arrival, I'll ask for parents, drivers, and chaperones when our travel roster is announced. So on 1678, because we have over 100 students on our team, we can't always we don't bring everyone on our travel team because that would just be too cost prohibitive. And so there is a team selection that goes on. Typically, we try and have our travel team announced about a month in advance. And so once we have that travel team announced, I can send out the request for parent volunteers to drive when it's something that's within driving distance. And for us, that's like a 3-hour radius is what we'll go to. So CVR in Fresno or Madera or Madtown and Madera, that's like the farthest we will drive. And then after that, I will hire a bus to take our team. 2 weeks before arrival is usually when the hotels will request a rooming list. And that lately has not been an optional request. I don't know if things have happened at hotels with students so that they request all student names, like 4 names per room. They want to know who is going to be in each of those rooms. And I think for fire safety is what I've been told is the other reason why they need it, typically 2 weeks ahead of time. So then, factor that into your planning as well if you have a selection process, or even if you don't have a selection process, you just have to have that information ready for the hotels. 1 week before, I like to ask the hotels to have all the rooms checked in before we arrive. So in our case, because I typically reserve between 20 and 25 rooms, imagine if you just showed up and you had to wait for them to do all that check-in upon arrival. It would just take a long time. And then typically the hotels that we stay at, we're not the only team that's staying there. There's probably multiple teams that are staying there. And so we want to just kind of facilitate the process as much as possible so that we're not taking up a lot of check-in time. And most of the hotels are really accommodating for that. They will have they will check in all the rooms. They'll just have the stack ready so that when I go to check in as the coordinator, they just hand me the stack and then I can just distribute them to our students. Oh, and then also because sometimes we may not need as many rooms as I've reserved if not as many parents are going to join us, because I do reserve extra rooms for parents to join us as well. Then you just want to release those rooms so that other teams who may need them or anybody else traveling would have access to them. For flights, what I try and do is I have a set of flights that I will kind of scout out times that will work for our team. And just so that I have that ready in hand. And this is especially more important for us when we go to Houston, because once we're confirmed, you want to make those reservations as soon as you can, because imagine all the teams that have to make flight arrangements and get on those same flights. And if you have a large team, you want to try and keep your team together, right? So finding available flights can get a little trickier the longer you wait. Once you can, typically for us, we have to go through a group reservation process because I'm purchasing more than 9 tickets. Nine is typically the threshold before you have to start moving into a group reservation. So Southwest has a special number, United has a special number. Those are the two we've flown with, but I'm assuming every airline has a group reservation number. You want to become familiar with their group reservation policies because their payments are not always the same. Like Southwest has a certain date range, so that if it's 30 days before your departure date, they're going to want your deposit X number of days beforehand, and then they're going to want that final payment X number of days beforehand. So if you become familiar with those airlines policies, it'll just make it easier for you in terms of your planning. Instead of, once you make your flight arrangements and all of a sudden you have to write this $13,000 check. And if you have to go through a process to get that $13,000 check through your district, if they're the ones paying for it, whoever it is it's paying for it, you just want to build in that lead time for whatever your payment process is. For areas where we can take a bus, so like when we've traveled to Utah or Las Vegas, and I think even Arizona, or if we were to go to Idaho, I will rent a bus. And for our school district, there's a certain list of bus companies that we're allowed to use. So again, that's something that you may want to check with your school district as well. Some of them will have a defined list, and maybe some of them you can call whomever you want. But I learned the hard way by calling whoever I wanted, only to find out I couldn't use the company that I thought would be the best rate for us, and then I had to go back again. So again, just to save yourself some time, find out what your district allows, and then go from there so that you don't have to backtrack and do extra work. What I found is that the maximum number of seats on the largest coach bus is 55 seats. So if you are a larger team, again, take that into consideration for who you're going to be taking with you as far as the students, mentors, if parents are coming along. For smaller teams, they certainly have smaller buses, but for us, I always have to look for the largest bus, and then that's one of our constraints in terms of our traveling by bus. You want to review the route to the event. Usually the bus company will do that, but in inclement weather, sometimes things get a little bit crazy. I know when we went to Utah? When we went to Utah, there was that huge snowstorm that came in along the 80, and the 80 was just shut down. And we had to get there, by a particular time. And I was working with the bus company to figure out which would be the most effective way to go there. And we had to actually end up routing through Las Vegas just to go all the way back up to Utah. And it turned out, and then we had to hire an additional bus driver. I mean, it just kind of snowballed into additional expenses. But at that point, we'd been confirmed, and, snowstorm came in a few days before the event. So there was not much we could do about it, but just you might want to factor in some rainy day money into these your budgeting, so that if inclement weather comes in, based on where we live and travel paths, that you can plan for that. For lunches, what we try and do is when we're on these away events, we try and find places that either have free delivery or else that they're close enough so that we can send a parent out to pick everything up. Ideally, we try and at least have one day of Costco meals because it's the most cost effective, right? Whether it's going to be the pizzas or their croissant sandwiches, it's the cheapest way to feed a large group of people. So we tend to scout out where the closest Costco is. We don't always find a Costco near where we are. So then I try and find restaurants that will provide free delivery. And again, I create a spreadsheet so that I keep track of restaurants in particular areas so that I don't have to do that research again if it's someplace that I'm going to return to. And then again, I always keep track of distance from the venue to the restaurant, so I know travel time, whether we can walk to the location to pick things up, and how easy it is to have things delivered. And I just kind of make notes of all that to keep track, and then that works within our budget. For dinners, once we are at away events, we try and find places where we can walk because once we're there by bus, it's a little bit difficult to keep having the bus route us back and forth. So 1 mile is our outer radius, but we try and keep things within half a mile because everyone's exhausted by the end of the day, right? To have to walk really far to a restaurant and then trying to factor that into where that plays into the route back to our hotel is important. Banquet rooms work very well for large groups. And even actually, if you're at a group of 20, it gets a little hairy for a restaurant sometimes. So you want to call ahead, you want to make reservations. Banquet rooms have worked well for a team of our size, and always having that buffet option. I don't know how that's worked for your teams when you travel far, especially like to Houston. We always try, or at least we've been trying to in the last few years. I've been trying to reach out to teams that we can get to know a little bit better, or that the team has had some relationship with, so that we can have some team dinners, so that it's not just all about the competition, right? And we go there and we're so focused on the competition, but I like to have our students take the time to get to know other teams. And I think it just makes it so much more fun, so that when they come back to other competitions and meet up, then they have like more friends, right, that they're familiar with at these events. So the last thing on the tips for the restaurants is I try and call at least 4 months in advance. For Houston, I just assume that we're going to go, and if we don't, I can always cancel. But Houston, I've had to plan like a year in advance, because there's not that many restaurants that can accommodate a group our size. So when we have our parents travel with us, we end up having about 60 people, which is a lot, right? And most restaurants I found in Houston that were within our price range could not accommodate a group our size. By that time, we're basically renting out the entire restaurant. And there's a couple that would work with us in that way. And so I just tell them on the way that we're on our way out, I'm like, we would just like to hold this date for next year. And if it doesn't work out, then I can cancel, but at least it's on their books. So that's something you may want to consider for areas that you travel to that don't have a lot of restaurant options for large groups, or whatever group your size is to call them in advance. And then, because our reservations are made so far in advance, I keep in touch with them throughout the year just to make sure that they haven't forgotten about us.
Okie doke. So that's my part. So again, I was lead scout last year, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So at least on our team, I think a lot of teams have like a lead scout, and it tends to be more of a strategy role. On our team, it tends to be really just logistics. So I'm in charge of everyone in the stands, which usually adds up to about like 25 to 30 kids. And despite the name, it's not just scouts, it's anyone in the stands, which includes our super scouts, strategists, software scouting developers, just anyone in the stands I got to be in charge of. And our lead scout gets trained in the off season. Manda mentioned Madtown Throwdown. That's one of the only ones where or our only off-season competition where we have like a travel team and a set amount of students get to go. And it's a great way to kind of get like thrown in the deep end as a lead scout, and you just kind of have to make a schedule. You got to kind of go with the flow. And it makes like in-season competition seem really easy, because logistically it's a nightmare. So before competition, the lead scout, we like to organize scout trainings. We prefer to have about 8 hours of trainings for each scout. We divide it among 2 days. The only person that has to do 16 hours of scout training is the lead scout. It's really fun. So we have to work with the software scouting developers, make sure that the app is actually ready for the scouts to use. It's also a great way to test the app with full 18 scouts. And then in addition, we have to create a scouting schedule. We prefer to have, again, 18 scouts watching the field at any given time. I've heard that's a lot of scouts, but it also means that like there's not as much time for breaks. We tend to have, I think, about 7 scouting shifts. So you're off for 30 minutes and then on for 210 minutes, I think. And then at Champs, we extended that time a little bit because we were at the farthest field. So a 30-minute break would essentially be like walking down to the pits and then staying for like 2 minutes and then walking back. And something that I noticed is printing out all the schedules. I usually print out the itinerary, I print out roll call list, and I print out the scouting schedule, just because a lot of times venues don't have good Wi-Fi, and I don't like using hotspots because I don't want to get in trouble. So it makes it a lot easier just having everything in a printed copy. And it's really easy to make notes on inevitably when someone has to leave or something. So during competition, lead scout, I'm in charge of roll call. So we've got a lot of kids. We tend to have about 45. And what we chose to do is, instead of saying names, everyone gets assigned a number. It's sent out on the master list before the competition. Everyone is expected to know their number. And it's so that way you can say like, all right, 1678, take roll. And it's just count off 1 to 45 usually. And I'll have the roll sheet with me. And if someone's not there, and if they're not supposed to be there, I can just say skip that number. It works really well if everyone knows their number and says it. I've seen it work really well, and it's really pretty, and we take roll in less than a minute, and I've seen it work really poorly because no one knows their numbers. So if you can get it to work, I'd really recommend it. It's really nice. And we take it as much as possible because competitions can be a little confusing. Someone might be missing. There's been a couple times where we've taken roll and we've realized we've actually have been missing someone. So it's worth it to take like 5 times before you leave, just to make sure you're not losing someone.
And the reason why we use numbers instead of names is that it's a kind of a blind way of calling roll. With names, it's like you're looking for people, right? And it's a little bit harder and takes longer to go through. So like Gemma said, when it works beautifully, and really we're done with our roll call. If everybody's just calling out their number like that, it's like with under a minute, we're done and we know everyone's there. So it allows a blind way of capturing the attendance of every student.
And then another job during competitions is communicating with Manda, our travel logistics coordinator, because I've got to keep in mind like how early we have to get to the venue to get good seats, but she's got to coordinate with parents how to get to the venue or with the bus drivers, and then also when or where lunch is, because I'm the one communicating with the students, she's the one communicating with the parents. So it's a lot of communication. Making sure you got good phone service is really useful. And then after competition, we debrief. We like to ask 3 questions: what went well, what could have gone better, and what will we do to fix it? It's a really nice way. One of our mentors showed us a way where you go around in a circle and everyone has to say one thing that went well. You're allowed like 30 seconds and you have to just keep going until you can't think of anything else. And then you go on to what could have gone better and you keep going until you can't think of anything else. And then you go to what will we do to fix it. It helps keep everyone on track. And it stops someone from rambling for too long. And then we also tend to have 2 debriefs. We have a competition debrief that really anyone is allowed to be at. And it's just what everyone thinks happened at the competition. So like maybe a scout sees something different than someone who's working in the pits. So it's really useful to have more people. But we also have a logistics debrief that's usually like me and Manda, and then our captain, vice captain, lead mentor. And it's more for things that are kind of boring for students, just making sure that everything went well, making sure everyone was like behaving properly. And that's where you kind of talk about more logistics side stuff. As far as communication, this is now just like general team stuff. I think all of this should still apply to Lead Scout, but setting up an open dialogue, it's really important. Just like, I don't know, whatever you're doing, we have like a team drive, just put it on the drive, make sure that everything is just open for everyone to hear. And then also following up. I know I have a habit of like, someone will tell me to do something and then I'll forget about it. So it's really useful, like following up, like, sometimes I get worried about like, oh, I'm going to be like nagging them. They're going to hate me. But it's honestly, it's worth it if it means whatever you ask them to do is actually going to get done. But at the same time, being flexible, everyone's got a lot of roles on this team. If someone can't finish something, you can't like stay in the ground and be like, no, you got to do this. You got to like be able to just like go with the flow. As far as platforms go, we tend to use Slack and email. Slack is really great because it's just everyone's on it. You don't have to like worry about like having a group chat and different types of phones and stuff. I know other people use Discord. I don't know why exactly we started using Slack, but everyone knows how to use it now. So we've just stuck with it. And then we also use email. That's a little more useful for like, it's a really nice paper trail. And it's just, you can send out a lot of information at once, a lot of links at once. So we tend to send out things in both. So we'll send out a Slack saying, hey, don't forget about the competition. And then at the same time, we'll send out an email saying, hey, don't forget about the competition, with all the links that you need. Again, I mentioned Google Drive. Centralized documentation is like, I think the key to our team's success. You don't have to use Google Drive. We chose to, and it's really nice. We keep everything in there. It's really useful for transparency between teammates. But in addition, in future years, inevitably, we're going to leave at some point. And it would suck to have all the information we learned over the years of being here to just disappear into our own personal computers. So it's really useful just to have everything there. Even if you don't think it's useful, it definitely is. And just everything you could possibly need. I know technical curriculum, that was something I've been working on this year. And that's something that it's just seeing what people have done in the past is really helpful when you're kind of floundering as a new lead. But yeah.
And so planning for the future, Gemma alluded to this. we're evolving teams, right? We're high school teams, so we're always going to have a group of students that's graduating out, and along with the knowledge bank or knowledge base with the students that graduate out, it also applies to the parent volunteers who've been involved in the group. So once I start seeing, at least from the parent side, that there's a junior or senior parent, I really start to try and push for the freshman and sophomore parents to get involved, because we need that young blood, that new blood in there to kind of pick up the slack from what's going to be, gone in a year or two. So typically I will have someone shadow a parent, a senior parent. I will take a junior or a sophomore or even freshman parent to shadow that person, so that they're shadowing for 1 year, and then they're going to be on their own for the next year. And if the parent group is young enough, it's nice, because then you have someone that's being shadowed, and then you can actually watch that person when they're doing it on their own. And so far that has worked. We've had enough parents go through that cycle where we haven't had too much of a hit, where somebody's taking care of a particular role and then nobody is stepping in. I think if you set that expectation and message earlier on, I do it at the very first parent meeting of the year, once we've identified the graduating parents and what deficits may be coming. Then I start recruiting people from that very first parent meeting to try and start shadowing, so that, again, we don't have that drop off. I believe the same thing happens on the student side with the peer-to-peer mentoring that we do on our team, and you can talk about
Oh,
that.
yeah. So pretty much it's kind of the same deal, but we tend to have students teaching other students. Our mentors are there to supervise, and that's about it. Again, with so many kids, it's really hard to have, I think we have 3 fabrication mentors. It's really hard to have 3 mentors teaching everyone at once. So it's really useful. I know we also have a lot of leadership opportunities for younger students. So we have a lot of outreach opportunities, a lot of competition leadership opportunities. So just kind of keeping an eye out. There's a lot of I've organized these workshops for the past 2 years, and then I became a lead. And if you ask almost any lead, sub-team lead in our team, they've almost always had a outreach opportunity earlier that they worked on. I believe, that's the end.
Yeah. So does anyone have any questions?
Also, real quick, this is a QR code.
All right.
It's a feedback form. If you guys want to take your phones out, it lets us know what you thought of this presentation and any future presentations you'd want to see. Yeah. And then also, if you guys have any questions, we'd love to answer them. Yeah?
If you want parents to volunteer, then do you need to provide them training of some sort, or any forms they need to fill out?
It depends on what role they want to volunteer in. So if I just need them to help as a parent driver, there's no training involved in that. If it's somebody who wants to become a mentor, then we try and figure out what they're interested in mentoring, number one. And then I have them talk to the coaches of the team, so that they can determine whether it's a good fit or not. Because sometimes we have parents who are interested in mentoring, but they don't really understand the time commitment that's involved. So coming once a month may work for some roles. It's not going to necessarily work for a mechanical fabrication mentor role or a mechanical design role, just because of how things work on developing the design for the robot, right? You kind of need somebody there a little bit more consistently to help students in that respect. But mostly for the parent volunteers I'm looking for, it doesn't require specific training. And maybe it's because we've gotten fortunate to have parents that have that skill set to come in. So for our construction kickoff construction team, for example, no one's necessarily going to train you on how to use hand tools, but the people who tend to volunteer are people who have experience building something to some extent. So we haven't had to have specific training for that type of parent volunteer role. Any other questions? You had your hand up.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you have any advice for trying to find food at stuff like Houston if you don't know where you're going in advance. Last team, our team managed to get into Houston by the lottery.
Okay.
And we learned in the middle of week 4 or something like that.
Right.
So we hadn't done any planning. I'm not quite sure how our people managed to pull it together last year. So I was just wondering if you have any advice regarding that.
Okay. So again, I tend to do a lot of research beforehand. So like I said, like I don't know if we're going to end up going to Houston. I plan as if we're going to Houston, and I just start. Actually, I usually start doing all the research in the fall. Off season is when I tend to do a lot of that pre-planning. I talk to our coaches to find out whatever regionals they think we're going to go to. So if they think we're going to go to, we got confirmed for LA North. It's an area we've never been to. So I've already started making a list. And whenever I make a list, I create that Google sheet. And I'm happy to share like a sample with you, like one of the ones that I've had, to show what information I tend to capture. And it's, name a restaurant, distance from venue to restaurant, distance from restaurant back to hotel, because I don't want it to be, a little bit lopsided in terms of being too far from one or the other. The price range, because we work within a budget. Like typically we allot $10 for breakfast, $10 for lunch, and $15 for dinner. And we don't typically have to spend $10 for breakfast because we'll go to Costco, we buy, muffins, yogurt, things, and it tends to be, we try and keep it around $5 a person, honestly, just because breakfast is one of the easier ones to keep the cost down on, so that I have more flex on the dinner time. Because at a place like Houston, it's really hard to stay within that $15 range, if that includes tax and tip, when we have such a large group. Because again, for our group, I'm having to request a banquet room almost always. Pizza is always going to be the cheapest, but also when we're traveling that many days, I'd like to try and give the kids something more than pizza to give them a little bit more sustenance. But for something like that, I would start planning now. You start just Googling restaurants in that area, and you have an idea of what your team budget may be. I keep track of the restaurants that fall out of our price range, because then I don't have to forget and call them again, right? That just wastes my time. So I will have a section of what are good options for lunch, what are good options for dinner, and what options are not available because they fall out of our price range. So that if basically all the information I capture, ideally I've left enough information so that if something happened and I couldn't continue in this position, whoever's stepping into it can just look at all my notes and just kind of keep going without missing a beat. That's how I try and document everything. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to ask, when you're collecting all your student info in the beginning of the year,
Mhm.
do you do that through like an electronic form?
Yeah, so when the students register, we have them register through a Google form, and they fill out their information, their parents' information, and so forth. But I have found that sometimes they're not quite so accurate, right? So even after they, like some kids forget and they put that they were born in 2019, which obviously doesn't work, right? Because they're thinking of the current date when they're putting in that information. So after all that information has been completed, and we've, got into our team meetings for a month or so, I'll have the captains, because we are a student-led team. Our parent group is there to support. We don't tend to drive a lot of it. Like we're there to help be at their bidding, kind of. Like we help we help them along where adult work is necessary, but we try and have the students do as much as possible. So I have the captain send out a message to the membership and say, please verify this information, because you can't get on a flight if your information is wrong. I mean, and there was one time where I had a student, he didn't spell his name, he didn't type his name in correctly, and so when we got there and the flight attendant, the check-in desk, like, this is not your name. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so then they were kind enough to kind of just let it go. We had to, fix it on the fly, but they're not always going to be that way. And it just holds things up, right? You have like 60 people in line waiting to check in, and you have that one student that's holding things up because it was incorrectly input. So we try and just have everybody 100% confirm their information is correct early on. But yeah, it's through a Google form. Yeah.
I was wondering if there's any specific things you guys do with Slack. Is there any like specific plugins or any specific like policies you guys have about using it that makes it more effective? Any specific things?
I don't know that we have specific policies other than they're supposed to use it.
Obviously, organization.
Yeah, the organization, we have, different channels to cover the different areas. We have a general for the entire team membership. We'll have specific travel channels based on the events. So we have like a CCC travel versus Chessie Champs travel, so that it's only hitting the students that it needs to hit, right? Or that they need to be involved. Different sub teams have their own Slack channels.
So I know it's different sub teams, and then like even within sub teams, we have like I'm on hardware fabrication, and then there's also a hardware router channel, specifically for fixing the router because it breaks a lot. So it's a great way of also kind of keeping track of what was broken and how we fixed it. I know in addition we use a lot. There's like the Google Drive like kind of like plugins. So like
Oh, right.
Google Drive is added. We also use polls a lot if we
Right.
want to like we're like, oh, we're having a summer meeting. How many of you guys can make it on this day, this day, this day, this day, or this day? And then people can just like click on the poll.
I think having those sub channels
Yeah.
is really, really helpful. So like I'm a business and media mentor, and we have a channel for websites. So that means anything we're tracking to update on our website or things that need to be fixed is just in that website channel. And then we have like a grants channel so that for anything that we're applying to, it's easier for us to keep track of which ones we're applying to and if they're being taken care of. Then we have threads within like each of the grants that we may be applying for. So I think having those sub channels, more granularity, I think helps to document and keep track for the students to have that one spot to go and check that things are getting done. And then for us to check that things are getting done. Email works well for longer communications, but I think also email is really for our parent community. Like you know, the students get the same information via Slack, but we don't have all our parents on Slack. So we have to send out that same information to parents, and all our parents are on email, right? But when we send it out, we're sending it out to the whole team. So the team that includes parents and students. We want to train students to also check email because, you know, in the real world, not everything is on Slack, not everything's on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, so forth. So they have to learn to check their emails, especially when college apps start coming around. You don't want to be missing communications via that route.
I do want to.
You can also do, I mean, you guys probably do, but when I do an email out to parents and students,
Mhm.
hearing the students might not read it, I send it to Slackbot, and then you can just put it into general from Slackbot, so the email actually.
Oh,
goes on
yeah.
Slack.
Oh, that's
So you
okay.
can actually email your email to Slack.
Oh,
And then
okay.
you can put it wherever you want.
That's good to know because I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
One thing you mentioned is threads.
Yeah.
Our team didn't use them when I first joined, and then we started using them, and those things have helped like a ton.
Right.
I really like them. It cleans up the channel so nicely. I think something else that like I don't know if it's like necessary, but our team has a rule where your Slack profile picture has to be a picture of your face, and your Slack name has to be your name, because like I'm probably not going to know one of the new like I don't know software general kids. So it's really useful if like I need to communicate with someone to have like that name and face attached to that person. But yeah,
Right. And we also have, there's a description, right? So even after your name, there's like a little description or something that you can have. We request all the students to actually put in their sub teams that they're assigned to in there. Because again, it's hard when you have new students and you don't know everyone just yet. And if I'm looking for a particular student, then I know to go into the electrical room versus the software general room if I'm looking for a student, if they actually have the real information in there and not some clever moniker.
and I think, sorry, one last thing. I'm like remembering them. We also, for software robot, when we're compiling code, we switched what we used a lot, like pretty much a different one every year, just because they haven't worked out. But we usually have like an add-on that we'll have a channel that's called like robot code builds, and it'll tell you what code has been built recently, and like how long it took, and did it actually successfully build. I think it was using Jenkins, I believe. So I don't know. That was something else that we used. Not a lot of people were on that channel because it kind of just spammed you. But it was kind of useful if like you went away from the computer for a little bit. Yeah.
So I'm curious about collecting information from students and parents. How do you control who has access to that?
We only allow core leadership to have access to that because
Yeah.
it's just the captains, vice captain, me as the logistics person. We have a 1678 shared drive, and then we have a 1678 management shared drive. So the management is only for the leadership, mentors, leadership, or core leadership, and that's it. So that's how we control it. We don't have it access to it.
We do have a third level of just core
Oh,
leadership.
okay.
I only found out about it because I saw it on someone's computer. It's super secret, but there is like one that is specifically for core leadership for very like kind of confidential stuff.
Right.
So 3 levels. And I think some students have access to 1678 management, but we also limit who has edit access to the management
Versus view,
drive.
right. Mhm.
So it's really nice to be able to have all that stuff organized like that.
Right.
But yeah. Any other questions?
So, kind of going back to talking about Slack.
Mhm.
If you said that you don't have parents on Slack, right?
Only parent leads. Parent leads are on Slack, but not our whole parent membership.
So then do students and parents, like do the student leads and parents coordinate through just like the parents leads? Or do the student leads and parents all do all the communication over email?
When we're requesting for volunteers, you mean, and coordinating the carpools and stuff like that, it'll be via email. When it's out to the other parents, yes. Mhm. Anything else?
It was great, by the way, really enjoyed
Oh,
it.
thank you.
You guys gave a lot of the specifics of who you have for various roles and trying to branch that out. A lot of teams, well, at least my team does not have 100 members.
Sure.
What, could you sum up your general principles of how, like your thought process behind that and how you maybe you approach it from if you were trying to move to a smaller team?
Smaller team?
What, just kind of headline, what are your steps? What do you do?
Okay, so if it was a smaller team, then generally speaking, it would be a smaller group of people taking on more roles. So initially, that committee that I showed you in the very beginning, that was all one woman when our team was 20 people. And then she continued to do that until our team grew to, what was it,
Logan graduated in 2017.
2017.
So
So
2018 was like, I think the first year we hit like 80, 90, 100 people.
okay, so prior to that, so basically prior to me taking it on, it was one person doing all of that, which she was a wedding coordinator. That was her job. And so I think it kind of fell in line a lot with what she was doing in terms of the travel and the hotels and restaurants and so forth. We've broken it out a lot just so that, again, so that I can have more parents involved. And a lot of it was just trying to get more people involved. It doesn't have to be that split up. So I think if you don't have as many members or resources, it's just combining some of those roles a little bit more. I think that's what it is. I've just split them up more just to be able to get more people involved. So our social events coordinator, for example, could very well be the same person that takes care of all our meals because a lot of it is meal planning, right? It's getting volunteers for the meals to have parents provide lunches and so forth during our build season versus planning meals for an evening event. That kind of all falls under the same thing. The travel logistics, I've kind of kept that piece as one, right? I could break it out into hotels, restaurants, and transportation.
Those people require some coordination.
Right. I just keep that out as one, and I've just maintained that one just because I think it's easier instead of having to manage more people. I think that's the best answer I can give you at this point. It's just combining those roles as opposed to splitting them out even more to involve more membership. Yeah.
Kind of tagging on to that
Yep.
thought, working on a smaller team right now, I like to have people with multiple titles with the recognition that they're wearing multiple hats, and it would be nice to break that out in the future. So naming them as multiple roles and then still having them be one person.
That's a good thought. Yes.
Well, given this discussion, have suggestions for getting parents to volunteer?
So
You have a mandatory parent meeting and a quarter of your parents show up, and none of them volunteer for anything.
yeah, it's interesting. We just had this discussion in our team about the 80-20 rule. Has anyone heard about that 80-20 rule?
20% of people do it.
80% of the work, right? And we have this. I don't know if it's a poster. It's a banner, I guess, that has all these up messages. And the very first one is show up, right? And we just talked to the students about showing up and how showing up is super important to getting to know the team, demonstrating initiative, and so forth. A lot of it is just, I think, trying to go back to talking to the parents as to why you, and some of this is what it is, why you had your child join the team as opposed to why your child wants to join the team. There is a little bit of both, right? I mean, let's be honest. So I think if you trying to understand the motivation from parents, I can then sort of tailor how I'm speaking to those parents, right? There's going to be that subset of parents who they want their kid to be part of a winning team. So we've been fortunate to have a good winning streak, right? We have. But that's not going to last forever, I don't think. I mean, at some point, something may change. I don't know. I don't want to jinx our team, I suppose. But it has to go beyond that, right? So I think what we try and teach them is that, yes, competition is a part of our team. And yes, it's great to be part of a winning team. But what are they getting along the way, right? I mean, like 80% of the time is spent in our shop where we're doing training, and these students are learning these valuable life skills, whether it's actual technical skills on learning how to use the machines that are in the shop, if you're in the mechanical area, or learning how to use software that's related to the CAD design. I think I've been trying to focus on my message to the parents is that they're learning so much outside of that 2 days that we travel to a specific competition, and that these life skills are going to be so beneficial to them when they leave and move on to something else. And I will give them testimonials from, what my kids have gotten through the program. And, generally that tends to help. I think when parents hear that the successes that students are experiencing are not just based on the fact of whether they're part of competition travel team or not, right? I mean, the fact that we have a selection process, it's difficult because then parents just want their kids to be on travel team. But again, if you total the number of days that we're actually at a competition relative to the number of days that they spend at the shop doing everything else, I think really the focus has to be emphasizing all the benefits they're getting from being on a team. And that's the first part of the message. The second part of that message is that stuff really can't happen without parent support, right? We are fortunate in Davis to have a fairly supportive community. And I won't say that 100% of our parents volunteer. We have a good number of parents that volunteer. But I think a lot of it's like, I have to keep plugging that message as to like the benefits that they're getting beyond just being part of travel team. And so that helps. And I think also having that volunteer interest form, that really increased our volunteers by a lot, because what I was hearing from parents was like, well, I could volunteer. I don't know what to volunteer for. Like, you say you need help. I don't really know what you need help for. So I think by pointing out specific areas that we need help, and then parents can say, oh, well, I'm comfortable driving. I'm not comfortable judging. I don't think I have the expertise or comfort level of judging youth robotics, the VEX IQ type of tournaments that we host. I think outlining that helps when you start to define where you need what your areas of need are. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming. And if you have any other questions, let us know.
Also, wait, real quick. If you guys ever have any questions later,
Yeah.
these are our emails. If you guys want to check them out or something, you guys can email us and we'll
Yeah.
respond.
And we can share our slideshow. I know that's a lot of information. So if you just want the slideshow to have some of that information, I'm happy to send it out.